Zainab was the pride of her village. Beautiful, gentle, and full of life. When Tariq, a wealthy and respected man, asked for her hand in marriage, everyone celebrated. "You are lucky," they told her. "A man like Tariq will give you a good life." But Zainab's mother, Fatima, was uneasy. "Daughter, marriage is not just about wealth," she whispered. But Zainab, blinded by love and the pressure of her people, believed she was stepping into a fairy tale. The wedding was grand. The drums echoed through the village, the women danced, and the men praised Tariq for choosing such a fine wife. Zainab's heart swelled with hope. But as the celebrations faded and the night fell, her dream turned into a nightmare. In the dim candlelight of their new home, Zainab nervously approached Tariq, expecting warmth. Instead, his eyes were cold, his face twisted with irritation. She had accidentally spilled a little water while serving him, and before she could apologize, his hand struck her face. The sting of his slap sent shockwaves through her body. "A wife must be perfect," he hissed, his voice laced with anger. "Do not embarrass me again." Zainab clutched her burning cheek, her mind racing. Was this the same man who had smiled at her during the wedding? The same man who had promised to cherish her? Tears welled in her eyes, but she swallowed them, convincing herself that it was just a mistake, a moment of anger. It would not happen again. The next morning, she ran to her mother, hoping for comfort. Fatima's face darkened when she saw the faint bruise on her daughter's cheek. "Leave him, Zainab," she urged, gripping her hands tightly. "A man who raises his hand once will do it again." But the elders and the women of the village had a different response. "Marriage is not easy," they told her. "You must endure. A good wife does not run at the first sign of trouble." Zainab looked at the faces around her, some filled with pity, others with indifference. The weight of tradition pressed down on her. She did not want to disappoint her family, to bring shame upon her home. So she wiped her tears, forced a smile, and returned to Tariq's house, hoping that love would soften his hands. But she was wrong. The slap on her wedding night was just the beginning. At first, Zainab thought she could change him. She convinced herself that if she was careful enough, if she spoke softly, if she did everything perfectly, Tariq would stop raising his hand. But she soon learned that it didn't matter what she did. The beatings came anyway. Some nights, it was because the food was not warm enough. Other nights, because he had a bad day at the market. And sometimes, for no reason at all. His anger was a storm, and she was caught in it, helpless and alone. She learned to recognize the signs, the way his jaw tightened when he was in a bad mood, the way his fingers curled into fists when something angered him, the way his voice dropped into a deadly whisper before the first slap landed. Some nights, he would hit her once and be done with it. Other nights, he wouldn't stop until she could barely move. The worst was when he would strike her and then hold her close afterward, whispering, "See what you make me do. If only you listened. If only you were a better wife." Zainab tried to hide the bruises. She became an expert at tying her headscarf just right, at keeping her face turned away when people spoke to her. But the pain could not be hidden forever. One afternoon, while fetching water from the river, she saw her childhood friend, Nadia. He had been her closest companion growing up, always teasing her, always protecting her. But when he saw the marks on her arms, his smile vanished. "Zainab," he said, his voice full of worry. "What is happening to you?" She opened her mouth ready to lie, but the truth spilled out instead. "Tariq, he hurts me." Her voice cracked, and the tears she had been holding back for so long finally fell. Nadia's hands clenched into fists. "Come with me. You cannot stay with him." But Zainab shook her head. "Where will I go? The village will not accept me if I leave my husband." Nadia's face was filled with anger, but he knew she was right. No woman had ever left her husband and been welcomed back. A wife belonged to her husband, no matter what he did to her. Still, he refused to let her suffer alone. "I will speak to the elders," he said firmly. "They must help you." Zainab felt a spark of hope as she followed him to the chief's hut. Chief Kamal was an old man with a stern face and a voice that commanded respect. He listened in silence as Nadia spoke, his fingers drumming against the wooden staff in his hands. When Nadia finished, there was a long pause. Then the chief sighed. "A woman's duty is to obey her husband," he said, his voice heavy with finality. "Marriage is not easy. Endurance is a woman's strength." Zainab's heart sank. She had known this would be the answer, but hearing it still crushed her spirit. Nadia's face was red with fury. So, you will do nothing, he demanded. Chief Kamal's gaze was cold. What do you expect? To take her away from her husband and shame his household? Do not bring this matter here again. Zainab felt numb as she walked away. The message was clear. No one would save her. No one would fight for her. She was alone. That night, as she lay on the cold floor, her body aching from another beating, she finally understood. If she wanted to survive, she could not rely on anyone. She had to find her own way out. The night the village would never forget began like any other. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, and the air smelled of rain. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the wind howled through the trees, whispering secrets no one could understand. Inside Tariq's hut, Zainab lay curled on the cold floor, her body trembling from pain. Tonight had been worse than usual. Tariq had returned home furious after losing money in the market, and she had paid the price for his anger. He had thrown her to the ground, kicked her ribs, and yanked her by the hair until she felt like her scalp would tear away. You are useless, he spat, standing over her. A wife who cannot even bring her husband good luck. What did I do to deserve such bad fortune? Zainab didn't respond. She had learned that speaking only made things worse. Instead, she shut her eyes and pretended she wasn't there. She imagined herself in another life, far away from this house, this pain, this man who had turned her life into a nightmare. When the storm finally broke, the rain came down in heavy sheets, pounding against the roof. Tariq, satisfied with the suffering he had inflicted, collapsed onto the bed and soon drifted into a deep sleep, his loud snores mixing with the sounds of the storm outside. The room was filled with darkness, but Zainab's eyes remained open. Her body ached, but her mind was sharp. This was the moment. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself up from the floor, biting her lip to keep from groaning in pain. She moved carefully, knowing that any sudden noise could wake him. Step by step, she made her way to the door, her heart pounding so loudly she was afraid it would wake the entire village. With shaking hands, she lifted the wooden latch and stepped outside. The rain hit her like a cold slap, soaking her instantly, but she didn't care. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the fresh air of freedom. For the first time in years, she was outside without permission, without fear. She looked around, her mind racing. She couldn't go back to her mother's house. The village wouldn't protect her. If she was going to escape, she had to leave everything behind. Her feet moved on their own, carrying her toward the forest. The trees swayed wildly in the storm, their branches stretching like arms, welcoming her into their shadows. She ran, ignoring the pain in her body, ignoring the cuts on her bare feet. She ran as if the wind itself was pushing her forward. And then, just as suddenly as she had started, she stopped. A sound. A presence. Something was watching her. She turned around, her breath caught in her throat. But there was nothing, just the rain, the trees, and the endless darkness ahead. Then, without thinking, she took one more step and vanished. The rebirth. Far beyond the village, where the thick forests gave way to a hidden valley, an old hermit named Baba Ali lived in solitude. The villagers spoke of him in hushed tones, calling him a man of mystery. Some said he was a healer, others swore he had powers beyond human understanding. Few had ever seen him, and those who did never dared to speak of it. It was there, in the depths of this forbidden valley, that Zainab opened her eyes. Her body ached, every part of her screaming in pain. Her vision was blurred, her skin covered in bruises and dried blood. The last thing she remembered was running, her bare feet pounding against the wet earth, the roar of thunder above her, and then darkness. You are safe now, a deep, soothing voice murmured. Zainab blinked, her gaze settling on the old man sitting beside her. His face was carved with lines of wisdom, his eyes sharp despite his age. He held a wooden bowl in his hands, filled with a thick, bitter-smelling liquid. Drink, he said, pressing it to her lips. She hesitated. She had learned not to trust anyone, but something about his gaze, his presence, felt safe. Weakly, she sipped the potion, wincing at its sharp taste. Within moments, warmth spread through her body, numbing her pain. Days turned into weeks. Baba Ali nursed her back to health, tending to her wounds with herbs she had never seen before. He fed her, clothed her, and taught her the ways of the land. But he was more than just a healer. He was a teacher, a guide, someone who saw the fire in her soul and knew exactly how to shape it. You have suffered, he said one evening as they sat by the fire. But suffering does not make you weak. It is the forge that will shape you into something stronger. Zainab listened, her heart heavy with memories of Tariq's fists, his cruel words, the way the village had ignored her cries. "I never want to feel weak again," she whispered.
Baba Ali nodded.
"Then you must learn."
And so she trained.
At dawn, she ran barefoot through the valley, her lungs burning, her muscles screaming in protest. By midday, she climbed the tallest trees, balancing on the thinnest branches, her hands growing rough and strong. Baba Ali taught her how to fight, not with brute strength, but with precision. "A snake does not attack wildly," he said.
"It waits.
"It strikes when the time is right." She learned the art of silence, of patience, of watching without being seen. She studied the power of herbs, not just to heal, but to weaken, to confuse, to make a man see ghosts in the dark. The Zainab who had stumbled into the valley was gone. In her place stood a woman of quiet strength, her scars no longer marks of pain, but symbols of survival. Yet, despite all she had learned, one thing remained: vengeance. She did not seek it in rage. No, rage was wild, uncontrollable. She sought it with the patience of a storm gathering in the distance, slow, steady, inevitable. One night, as she stood on the edge of the valley, looking back toward the village she had once called home, she finally spoke the words that had burned in her soul for so long. "I am coming, Tariq." The night was thick with silence, the kind that made even the wind afraid to whisper. Tariq sat in his hut, staring into the dying flames of his lantern. His face was hollow, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. His life had crumbled before him. His wealth was gone, his cattle dead, and his new wife had fled in terror. But none of that compared to the fear that gnawed at his bones, because something or someone was coming for him.
Then it happened. A knock.
Not a loud, impatient one, but slow, deliberate, a soft tap, tap, tap against the wooden door.
His body stiffened.
He hadn't expected visitors, not at this hour, not when most of the village feared him now.
He swallowed hard. "Who's there?" Silence. Then laughter.
A woman's laughter, low and haunting, drifting through the night air like a ghost's whisper. It curled around him, sent shivers crawling up his spine. His throat went dry, his hands clammy as he stared at the door.
He knew that laugh. It was impossible.
It had to be impossible. Summoning what little courage he had left, he grabbed a lantern and slowly crept toward the door. His fingers trembled as he unlatched it and pulled it open. And there she stood, Zainab. But not the Zainab he had left broken and bleeding on the floor.
No, this woman was different.
She was tall, her posture unshaken, her dark eyes piercing straight into his soul. She wore a warrior's cloak, the fabric draped over her shoulders like she was born to wear it. Her skin, once bruised, now glowed under the moonlight, as if the gods themselves had restored her. Tariq stumbled back, his breath caught in his throat.
"No. No. You're dead. You vanished."
Zainab stepped forward, her gaze never leaving his. "I did not vanish, Tariq," she said, her voice calm yet filled with something powerful. "I was reborn." Behind her, standing tall like a shadow of judgment, was Baba Ali. The old hermit's face was unreadable, his presence like a storm waiting to break.
Tariq's knees weakened.
His heart pounded violently in his chest. This couldn't be real. It shouldn't be real.
But it was.
And for the first time in his life, he was the one who felt powerless. The village square was packed, the air thick with murmurs and whispers of shock and anticipation. Word had spread like wildfire. Zainab had returned, and she had come with the truth. Tariq stood in the center, his face pale, his body rigid. His eyes darted around, looking for a way out, but there was none. The entire village had gathered, the elders seated in a semicircle, their expressions grim. At their center sat Chief Kamal, the oldest and most respected elder, his face carved with wisdom and justice. Zainab stood opposite Tariq, her posture straight, her eyes unflinching. The warrior's cloak draped over her shoulders made her look more like a queen than the broken woman they had once ignored. Behind her, Baba Ali stood like an unshakable force, his presence a silent warning that justice would be served. Chief Kamal cleared his throat, his deep voice echoing through the square. "Zainab, you have returned after many moons. Tell us, why have you called this gathering?" Zainab took a step forward, her voice calm yet firm. "I have come to speak the truth, to reveal what was hidden for too long." She turned to face the crowd. "For years, I suffered in silence. Tariq, the man you once respected, was not the husband you believed him to be. Every night, behind closed doors, he beat me. He cursed me. He broke my bones and my spirit. And when I cried for help, no one listened. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some covered their mouths in shock, while others exchanged guilty glances. Tariq scoffed, forcing a laugh. Lies. She is mad. Why would I? Zainab raised a hand, silencing him. Do not speak, Tariq. The truth no longer hides in the shadows. Then, a voice from the crowd spoke. She is not lying. Heads turned as a woman stepped forward. It was Nadia, Zainab's childhood friend, her eyes filled with sorrow and anger. He did the same to my cousin before she died. Another voice joined in. He beat my sister too. And another. He stole from the weak, threatened those who couldn't fight back. One by one, women, men, even elders began to speak. Stories poured out, tales of cruelty, of violence, of fear. The truth unraveled before the entire village like a dark cloud lifting to reveal the storm that had always been there. Chief Kamal's face darkened. Tariq, you have betrayed the trust of this village. You have harmed the innocent and hidden behind power. There is no place for such evil here. Tariq fell to his knees. Please, I beg. The time for begging is over, Chief Kamal declared. The elders murmured among themselves before the chief rose. You are stripped of your land, your title, and your home. From this moment, you are banished to the forest, where the spirits and the beasts shall decide your fate. Tariq's face drained of all color. The forest, the very place where whispers of the dead roamed, where no man returned alive. Guards grabbed him by the arms. He thrashed, screamed, begged for mercy, but the village had turned their backs on him, just as he had turned his back on them for years. As they dragged him toward the wilderness, he looked up one last time. Zainab stood tall, unshaken. Her eyes held no hatred, no vengeance, only the power of a woman who had reclaimed her life. And with that, Tariq was swallowed by the trees, never to be seen again. The aftermath. Zainab stood at the edge of the village, watching the rising sun paint the sky with golden hues. The air felt different now, lighter, freer. The weight that had once pressed down on her chest, the fear that had ruled her every breath, was gone. She was no longer the broken woman who had suffered in silence. She was reborn. The people of the village now looked at her with respect, not pity. They whispered her name with awe, not sorrow. Women who had once been too afraid to speak now found their voices. Men who had turned their backs on suffering now stood for justice. Everything had changed. It started with a young girl who came to her hut, eyes wide with fear, arms covered in bruises. She had nowhere else to go, no one else to trust. Zainab knelt before her, gently taking her hands, and whispered, "You are safe now." Then came another, and another. Women from across the village and beyond came to her for healing, for guidance, for strength. Some had been beaten, some had been abandoned, some had simply lost hope. Zainab gave it back to them. She learned the ways of healing from Baba Ali, mixing herbs with wisdom, turning pain into power. But she was not just a healer of wounds, she was a healer of souls. She taught women to fight, to stand tall, to never bow to cruelty again. She became their protector. The village that once ignored suffering now refused to tolerate it. The elders, once blind to abuse, enforced new laws. A man who raised his hand against his wife would face justice. No woman would be told to endure. No mother would have to beg for her daughter's safety. Zainab's name spread far beyond the village. Travelers spoke of her story, a tale of suffering, survival, and justice that reached the ears of kings and commoners alike. Women from distant lands came to seek her wisdom. Men learned to fear the wrath of karma. And so Zainab, the woman who once cried alone in the night, became a legend. A symbol of strength. A name that would never be forgotten. Epilogue. In the depths of the forest, where shadows danced and whispers lingered, Tariq wandered aimlessly. His body was weak, his mind shattered. The voices followed him everywhere, soft, haunting, relentless. Tariq, they called, a chorus of women he had wronged. Now you know how it feels. He stumbled, fell, and never rose again. The forest claimed him, as it claims all who are unworthy of the light. And in the village, under the watchful eyes of the elders and the grateful smiles of the women she had saved, Zainab lived on. Not as a victim, but as a victor. Not as a shadow, but as a beacon of hope.